cut. It looks very nice.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I've said that I'm a Tanya Angie wannabe.
Well, any hair that you don't need, just I'll take it.
Well, it was amazing 7 inches that got chopped off. So
Bragger. I don't do that in a year. 2 years.
All right. And Commissioner Treese, we have Chair Harrington joining us, and we are ready to go for you.
great. Well, good morning. It's Tuesday, February 9th. And Chair, you are with us by video as well. It's nice to see you. So I'm going to go ahead and run the meeting. Is that your preference? Okay, great. All right, I am Pam Treese, District 2 Commissioner for Washington County. And today we have a full complement of our commission. Chair Harrington is coming to us from afar, so we will be gracious in any internet problems that she may have. But I have with me again Chair Harrington, Commissioner Rogers, Commissioner Willie, and Commissioner Fye. So our first order of business is board and leadership communication. Well, who would like to go first? Obviously, it's not Commissioner Willie. There he is.
Wow. Well, I can start. We had a WCCC meeting yesterday, and the thing that probably was the most interest is when we started talking about the Complete Streets update, and that was brought to us by Aaron, and the cities really had great interest in that in terms of what it meant for connectivity with their particular systems. And I think every city chimed in about, gee, we need to coordinate a whole lot more with us, because if we are to be a provider of those services in the future, we want to make certain that those streets align. So whether it was Hillsborough, who had comments in regard to designation of streets, to Beaverton, who said, gee, if we're taking these over, what's that going to look like? And it was a little bit of a robust communication piece with the cities yesterday. So beyond that, I don't have anything to report.
Thank you. Who's next?
I'll go next. So yeah, last week, Commissioner Treese and I met with Ezra with the Home Builders, had a good conversation. Also, Michelle, Commissioner Treese, what is Michelle's last name with PBAR?
I'll think of it just a minute. Keep going.
Anyway, we got a good update on the housing situation in the Portland metro area. Michelle was saying that we have a 7-day housing inventory right now. And so obviously still a tremendous demand on housing, both single family and multifamily housing. So that was a good update. We had a good conversation with, of course, with Ezra and the Home Builders regarding permits and fees and those kinds of things from the AUT department. So it was good to meet with them and have that conversation. Then I also had a STIA meeting. STIA is the Salmon Trail Intergovernmental Agency. You're going to get we're going to have a work session on that next week. So we'll get a complete update on both the STIA and the Salmon Trail Foundation, and where we are in all of that. That'll be good because they have made a monetary ask. And so we're going to talk with the executive director of the Salmon Trail Foundation, and he'll certainly bring us up to speed and the importance of the funding ask that they've made. So other than that, it was just kind of a normal old week of meetings. Of course, we had the roundtable last week, so we got 2 days of this. So that's all I got.
Thank you. Commissioner Fye?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone. I feel like I want to say happy Monday, but I know it's Tuesday. But it's just force of habit of first time seeing everyone. Last week was busy with our roundtable, and then busy with a lot of internal departmental briefings and learning more about our own departments and what they do, and just to better align myself and how I can be impactful. I've also attended community meetings. Some community invite me to speak at their events. And then yesterday was really, I attended the AOC meeting, which is really an interesting meeting, the legislative committee, and had a lot of discussions about mostly public health related. The bills that stood out for me were public health related, and I feel like I'm not sure. I don't know if all of us are part of that committee. I know you were there as well, and but some of the bills that got voted out to not support were things that are really important to Washington County and our constituents. So perhaps maybe that's a committee we can all join to better speak for our constituents in Washington County holistically. I noticed other counties, the majority of them were there. And one of the bills that got voted out was a bill around tobacco prevention that weren't being supported. So that's an interesting situation with counties, some counties supporting, some are not supporting, but it felt pretty, the gap was pretty big gap. And I think that's a bill that Washington County is going to support. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I had a meeting with my briefing from the GR team, which is the government relations team. Was a while, but I think that's a bill we're supporting. So, but that legislative committee, an eye-opening of the importance of being at the table and also speaking from the bills that are concerned, because the rural counties are really good at being vocal and speaking. And also there's another good conversation about school resource officers and a bill at the state level and what is the responsibility for counties to support that bill in order to pass. And a lot of people, especially the heavier concentrated counties, made the case passing that bill and supporting that bill. However, rural counties didn't feel the need. So I think for us as a concentrated heavy county, big county, I would advocate for all of us to be part of that. I don't know who's a voting member, so I'm going to reach out to that committee and learn more about that. But that was a good policy committee that was yesterday.
Thank you. There's a lot to learn about AOC for certain. Chair, did you want to jump in here?
Yep, just a very brief update. As Commissioner Willie mentioned, most of last week, 2 days worth of commission meetings. Then I had several different briefings on different topics. So no official committee meetings last week. So here we are in February, and I'm looking forward to hearing how we're doing as Washington County with regard to our COVID status as well. So thank you.
Great. It's nice to see you. I have a few updates as well. One thing that I'd like to mention is that we're saying goodbye this week to Alex Vidal, the staff assistant that has been supporting Jerry and myself, and we all wish him the very best. He's made a family decision and they're going to San Diego. My understanding is they've located a place close to the beach, which is that's good news, and we're all very happy for him. At the same time, we are welcoming Megan McKibben. Megan is coming to us from Congressman Kurt Schrader's office. She's going to be a great addition to our whole team here. And Jerry and I had the opportunity, Commissioner Willie and I had the opportunity to meet with both Alex and Megan yesterday. I think Megan's eyes are a little big right now, but she's got a great appetite for learning, and I'm sure she'll be, like I said, a great addition to our team. Jerry, did you want to add anything to that?
No, thank you, Pam. I gave you the lead in there because I didn't want to jump in there, but no, it's great to welcome Megan, and certainly Alex. We do wish you the best. You've been a great first assistant for me and for Pam, and so you taught us a lot. We learned a lot together, and so yeah, we certainly wish you the best on your new trip and your new chapter of your life. And Megan, yes, yesterday I think we definitely handed you the fire hose, and you took it really very well. So just hang in there, and yeah, I'd like to say it'll get better, but it's not. It's going to be life. So anyway, welcome to Megan.
So I'd like to continue just quickly. I have the Public Health Advisory Committee meeting tonight. I'm also going to be attending the CPO1 meeting along with Melissa DeLizer. The discussion points, I'm just attending, I'm not presenting. The discussion points are going to be the Thompson Road and also the Senior Living Center on Saltzman Road. So I'll be attending that meeting. On Thursday night, I have the the Policy Advisory Board, and we're going to be reviewing the scoring from for the CDBG and Holmes Awards. Then I also have a meeting, the first meeting of a group that's coming together to talk about childcare issues in Washington County. So that will be on Thursday. So that's my week. I think everybody else covered my meetings from last week, so I appreciate it. And now to leadership communication. Tanya.
Good morning, Board of Commissioners. I do have some exciting news to share. We remain hopeful, and it is our understanding that we will be moving into high risk today. So that it hasn't been formally announced, but all the data points to that direction. So normally I don't get excited about saying we're in high risk, but this is actually great news. Our staff team is transitioning to allowing now in-person services, yet I do want to urge our community to still try to engage with us virtually in online services because we don't want to see spikes in the future. So that transition will actually go into effect next week. More to come, and we will be issuing a press release on this news, hopefully later today and throughout this week. Relative to employees, TVFNR, Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, is hosting several clinics this week that will help us reach the last of our phase 1 employees who have still been waiting for their first dose of the vaccine. We also have some phase 1 employees that are receiving their second dose this week. And so by the end of this week, approximately 200 employees will be fully vaccinated. Just from an information point, per CDC guidelines and confirmed by County Public Health, people who have been vaccinated for at least 14 days are not required to quarantine if they're exposed to COVID and are a close contact. I have another data point that is, we still have employees who are impacted, but this is the lowest employee count that I've been able to report to the board. So employees in isolation, 1. Employees who are quarantined and close contact, 1. So that our numbers have came down significantly. So that's really great news from an employee standpoint. Another change that has occurred is Westside Commons, including Wingspan Event and Conference Center, will be able to reopen to the public for limited activities. Oregon Health Authority, OHA, recently updated their sector guidance for event facilities such as ours. So what does that mean for events? It means that we can start to host consumer trade shows, craft shows, market, car and RV shows, some examples of events we cannot host at this time are food and beverage events such as banquets or food tasting, concerts, and amusement or theater activities. And also at this time, the annual county fair in its normal format would not be able to occur under this new guidance. So the board will receive an update later today from Leah with this news. I will say this is a shift for us because we were operating under the previous guidance. So we will be updating our financial scenarios, which is a good thing. So Leah and team are quickly working on that so we can report out a financial update to the board in the coming months. And that concludes my my update.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful news. And I guess my view on this is we need to be diligent. We need to continue to wear our masks, wash our hands, maintain our distance so we can continue in this category and move forward together. So thank you, Tanya. That's wonderful news. With that, let's move to Alan.
Sure, thank you. Following up on the FISA's comments, the government relations team has been keeping us busy reviewing bills, me and my staff, and the majority of them, unfortunately, are problematic, but we're providing them with comments. I also got a new lawsuit yesterday. We seem to be getting a lot of those, and they'll give an update to the board by the end of the week. And the good news is we'll be interviewing candidates for Chris Gilmore's position next week. So hopefully we'll get some more help on board. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Diane.
Good morning, board. I have some good news to report. We're still low on our cases also. We do have one employee that has been exposed to a House member that has tested positive, but that employee reports their testing is negative. So that's a very positive thing. And they're working from home right now as they help support their families. So that's really great news. Mark Jockers is at the legislature this morning testifying on House Bill 2344, which is the wipes labeling bill. He's doing this on behalf of the Aqua, SDAO, and LOC's interests, and there has been supporting testimony from OBC as well as the wipes industry. So everyone is coalescing around this labeling that we need to can wipes and not put them down our sewers. So that's a really positive note. This afternoon, Mark Jockers and Kathy Leader will be leading the discussion. I have a meeting, I'm part of a panel, and so they'll be supporting the discussion on our budget committee. But thank you, everyone. We are preparing for the potential snow operations on Thursday, Friday, and through the weekend for our 24/7 folks. So hoping it's a light snow, but we'll see what happens later in this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. We have our fingers crossed as well. So I appreciate that. So that concludes our leadership communication. With that, I believe we are going to our first item for discussion, which is the Urban Reserves Transportation Study implementation. Clerk Moss, do we have Stephen Roberts? There he is. Good morning, Stephen. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Just wanted to do a really quick introduction, and then I think Aaron Wardell and potentially Jessica Pels are going to actually walk through the presentation. But we're here to brief you, as you said, on the Urban Reserves Transportation Study implementation. We've wrapped up the study, essentially. And so we wanted to provide you with an overview from the outcomes of that, and then talk about potential next steps as we start trying to implement those outcomes. And specifically some potential transportation system plan amendments that we want to share with you. And I would just note the board was previously briefed on this project back in June of 2019 and July of 2020. So this has been going on for a little while. And I think with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Aaron and Jessica.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, Chair Harrington and members of the Board of Commission. We are here today to share the Urban Reserves Transportation Study. I'm Aaron Wardell, Principal Transportation Planner, and with me is Jessica Pels, Senior Planner, who is our project manager. Next slide, please. I want to start by defining urban reserves. The urban reserves are future urbanizable land outside of the urban growth boundary. And this map that's displayed on the screen shows the urban reserve areas in blue. You'll also see some tan hatched areas. Those are areas that were urban reserves until 2018 when Metro added them to the urban growth boundary. It's actually still being litigated, but we expect that they will come fully into the urban growth boundary soon. And the cities of Hillsborough, Beaverton, and King City are actively planning for those areas now, conducting comprehensive planning. So those areas were included as part of the urban reserves for this study. So in 2018, Washington County completed the Transportation Future Study, which was a very long-range 50-year look at what transportation will look like for Washington County. And an outcome of that study was that as these urban reserve areas are added to the urban growth boundary and develop, they will cause an impact on our transportation system. So the purpose of the Urban Reserves Transportation Study was to dig into that a little bit and understand better what changes we need to make to our transportation system plan to be ahead of the planning and the urbanization that will occur here. It's important to keep in mind that this is really long-range transportation planning. We are studying these transportation system impacts so that we can add them to our 20-year transportation system plan. We are not prioritizing or ranking or identifying funding for any of the proposed transportation system plan amendments. Those steps will happen later, but at this time we're identifying that we're seeing a system need to make some changes to our transportation system plan. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. So a little background on the Urban Reserves Transportation Study is that, as Erin said, we identified this need and we sort of wanted to get ahead of the cities with the transportation planning so that we could best inform the concept and comprehensive planning for the urban reserves by having an idea of the congestion areas that we are seeing and the potential projects that might help mitigate the transportation impacts so that we can include these projects in the concept and comprehensive planning for the cities. We did get a grant from Metro for $420,000. And this project took about 18 months from when we started it in May of 2018 and we finished it in December of 2020. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all of our accomplishments here, but I wanted to list them because we are really proud of this study and we learned so much. And we got to coordinate really closely with the cities, with the agencies and special districts and Metro. And we coordinated with stakeholders, including Thousand Friends of Oregon, the Oregon Department of Agriculture, the Home Builders Association of Portland, and Department of Land Conservation and Development, as well as we presented at the community participation organizations. And we did talk with a couple of landowners specifically about certain aspects of the project or might be close to their properties. We did get some major deliverables out of this that the cities can use going forward, and I'll talk about those in a minute, including the Infrastructure Finance Plan Toolkit and Template, which was just an outstanding piece of work from one of our sub-consultants, Echo Northwest. Next slide, please. So I'll just go into a little bit of the basis of the study. We started with figuring out land use assumptions for the urban reserve areas. For that, we started with Metro's assumptions, and then we refined those where we had concept plans for some of the urban reserve areas already adopted by the cities, or where we had city feedback on what they thought they might want to see there in the future that was a little bit different than Metro's base assumptions. So we allocated the dwelling units per acre and employees per acre to the reserves, and this was the total number that we came up with. And if you do the math, it does come out a little bit low on density, but this just reflects that some of the urban reserves have a lot of topographic challenges. And things will change, obviously, as cities refine them, but this did provide sort of the basis for the transportation analysis that we did for the reserves. Next slide, please. So the land use assumptions, we then put those into the travel demand model to help inform us on where we would see future congestion. So not surprisingly, we can expect a lot of congestion around the reserve areas, around the edge of the city, and on our major arterial roadways where we might expect to see it. So then we started adding potential projects to help mitigate that future congestion. And this map shows where some of those projects are. These projects were identified from the Cooper Mountain Transportation Study, which was the precursor study to the urban reserve area and focused on really the area around the mountain and over the mountain, both. And we also had some projects in the county's transportation system plan that we thought could help what were currently identified as unfunded. And again, as Aaron said, we're not supposing any funding for these projects, but we thought, what if we move that and kind of modeled it and see how it performed. And then there were a couple of new projects analyzed for this study, including down in the South County, that Brookman Road extension. And that's a really, really long-term project, but it is one that has been identified and talked about over the years. Next slide, please. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky because then we figured out cost estimates for all these potential package of projects. And we also put those into a package for each reserve. So we sort of listed all the projects that would be needed for each reserve. And this was from the Regional Transportation Plan, this study, and from Metro's 2018 Urban Growth Report, which identified potential future collector level roadways through the reserves. And then we used this cost estimate based on either the cost that was already in the Regional Transportation Plan, or we worked with our capital projects team to determine what an average cost might be per lineal foot. And that was $2,500 per lineal foot is our estimate on that. And so we kind of applied that. And this is the estimated total cost per reserve just for transportation infrastructure alone. So this doesn't include water, sewer, stormwater, any other infrastructure needed. But this helps give us a really good idea of the cost to develop these areas in the future. And the other important thing from this is that this includes projects that are a regional impact. So it might lead to some cost sharing discussions between the county and the city. And these questions are already coming up as the cities are planning for these areas in some cases. And some of these projects are more internal to the reserve alone, which would be more of a city or development responsibility. Next slide, please. So we have a two-pronged approach for implementation of the Urban Reserves Transportation Study. One is that we did have these really great deliverables that the cities can use in their concept and comprehensive planning for the urban reserve areas. So as I said at the beginning, our goal was to really inform concept and comprehensive planning for the reserves. So we have this infrastructure analysis summary report that really goes through all the transportation analysis done throughout the study. And it has a product that is an information sheet for each reserve. And I think I'll go through that in a minute in a future slide. But basically it has all that information of the land use assumptions, some future recommendations, and the projects for each reserve. And then the infrastructure funding plan toolkit, and I'll go through that in a future slide. But really, that was such a great piece of work, and it really is like a textbook of transportation funding, which was so great. And then we have the recommended transportation system plan amendments for us to adopt into the county transportation system plan, and that helps us preserve future right-of-way. And so it doesn't promise that this road will be built, but when we adopt an alignment and an area develops, that means we expect that that roadway will be built either through development, through a capital project, or just the right-of-way can be dedicated. So it really is a tool to help us build that transportation system in the future. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so here's some more details about the infrastructure analysis summary report. As I said, it just really helps the cities with some information that is targeted to their specific urban reserve area with the map, the land use assumptions, the projects that are expected to be needed, and then the recommendations, which is part of it is that these reserves are so close together. And so some recommendations for modeling the impacts that are not only that specific reserve, but maybe including some land use assumptions from neighboring reserves in some cases. Next slide, please. And the infrastructure finance plan toolkit, again, is just a veritable treasure trove of information, everything you could ever want to know about the regulatory framework, the processes for funding plans. It has a lot of options on revenue projections, funding options that are potential, strategies, how to phase things. And then it has interactive templates where cities can actually input their own projects, the length, the size, et cetera, and not only for transportation, but for water, stormwater, sewer, even parks. And it will help identify the actual costs, and then they can put in their expected revenue, and it really helps identify funding gaps and strategies for how to overcome those. Next slide, please. And now we have our proposed transportation system plan amendments, and we have categorized these as short-term and long-term. And this again is not in any way about funding or construction priority. This is really just saying that for the short-term ones, we have an imminent need to identify these because there is city concept or comprehensive planning happening where we will need to have the roadway alignment adopted so that it can be included in those planning efforts. Or there's imminent development application where we need to have the correct alignment identified so that we can get the adequate right-of-way that we need in the accurate location. So as I go through these, the first three on the list, the 185th Avenue extension, the Grabhorn Road curves, and the 175th Avenue kink, that's in an area that is being planned by Beaverton for the Cooper Mountain area that just, as Aaron said, came in to the urban growth boundary with the 2018 decision. The Tile Flat Road extension is in an area called River Terrace West Urban Reserve that is currently being planned by Tigard for concept planning for future inclusion in the urban growth boundary. And then the Basalt Creek Parkway extension, and don't worry, I have maps for all of these that I'll go through in a minute that will make it a lot more clear. The Basalt Creek Parkway extension, Tualatin has annexed land all the way to the boundary of that, and there's imminent development applications. So we would need to know where they need to dedicate right away. Next slide, please. And for the long-term need, so again, these really could be funded and constructed anytime the board desired, but there's not really any imminent development in these areas. They're not urbanizing or being currently planned for concept or comprehensive planning at the moment. And that is the Shackelford Road extension. And again, this is already an adopted alignment, but what we're proposing is a refined alignment that we identified through this study. One thing we did with this study, and I kind of forgot to mention this, but we did some additional engineering feasibility analysis on some of the alignments that we had adopted into the transportation system plan already to make sure that they would work in the future. And especially as these areas are being planned, we wanted to make sure that we had the accurate alignment. And so that's what some of these amendments are, is just a refinement to an adopted alignment. The Cornelius Pass Road extension, that would be a new roadway extension. It is in an area that is currently designated as rural undesignated. So it probably would not be built until that area is brought in as urban reserve area or urban growth boundary and ready for development. And then finally, we need to change the functional classification of a section of Tile Flat Road, and that is really not needed until at such time that River Terrace West starts building and gets more busy and people start using that Tile Flat Road more. Next slide, please. This is a map of the 185th Avenue extension. So this area is currently identified in the transportation system plan as a refinement area, which means that we always plan to do an extension of 185th Avenue, but we weren't sure exactly where the alignment should go. And it was really a challenge actually to figure out where it should go. And so our consultant team went out there and did this about 5% engineering analysis and determined where that alignment should go and how the future intersections might work. Next slide, please. This is Grabhorn Road curves realignment. Again, this area that is blue crosshatched is Beaverton.
Can I ask a question back on the prior slide?
Oh, sure.
For this has the city of Beaverton gone through and done the community planning for this area? Because I'm really wondering about the impact of putting in this extension as an arterial, as opposed to, you know, folks currently use Gassner and 190th, excuse me, and over to Kemmer. So why not just have this, given that it's a short area, why go through all the major effort for an arterial here versus having it transition to a neighborhood street?
That's a really great question. And we have been working with the city on this, and I do meet regularly with Casera, the project manager for this Cooper Mountain planning area. I think we actually kind of struggled with this, whether this would be something that would be a good arterial, and ultimately kind of decided that 185th is an arterial all the way to here. And with this roundabout here, it really makes that movement as an arterial movement all the way from here up to Highway 26. And it provides some relief.
This is the top of Cooper Mountain. Let's be clear on that, you know?
Well, we are seeing so much congestion here.
Highway 26 makes no sense to me.
I mean, more as just using it as a direct route where there's a roundabout here, and then this would be a roundabout here. So it would be one continuous movement up, because we're seeing so much congestion here on 175th. And it's fine that if we didn't, I mean, and Aaron can jump in here too, because it was just one of those things where it was identified as a refinement area. And so we thought, if we're going to move forward with it, this is how it would go. And it's up to the board if you think that's an appropriate amendment or not.
I can chime in and say it's a little odd because it connects an arterial segment to another arterial segment, but then there's that collector in between. And so this is something that staff need to take a look at.
I think we're looking at it too much from the standpoint as transportation nerds versus what kind of community is going to exist on the top of a mountain. That's my point in wanting to let the city of Beaverton really take the lead with regard to the community planning. You know, the orange area of 185th is neglected by comparison. So that's all. I'm just trying to reemphasize the community planning element versus the transportation needs, right? I mean, how many times have I heard congestion in this presentation already? So thank you for letting me raise the flag on that. I appreciate it. Let's move on.
It is a really good point, though, and we are coordinating extensively with Beaverton because they're conducting the comprehensive planning for this blue hatched area right now. They're doing a lot of community outreach and a lot of thinking about these things. Beaverton staff are on board with these proposed TSP amendments, and our understanding is they'd like to see them all implemented into the county's TSP. So that's a conversation we'll continue having with Beaverton staff and electeds as we go through this.
And I do appreciate the reminder that we sometimes get a little too wonky and technical in our language. Okay, next slide, please. So the Grabhorn Road curves, this is really a safety project. As anybody who's driven out there knows, these are literally these 90-degree curves. And the Willamette Water Supply Program is putting in some reservoir tanks in here, and they own both these properties. So we expect this right away to be dedicated by them.
Just to clarify, Jessica, they own the north property. So the northern curve you see on the map is owned by Willamette Water Supply.
And this one and this one. This lower one is currently being planned through Beaverton's Cooper Mountain comprehensive planning, and they are showing this sort of alignment, and it is a safety improvement. So we are picking that up here. Next slide, please. 170th Avenue Kink, this one was really a challenge. What we have existing out there is the solid line. Of course, this really kind of extreme kink. It's a 15-mile-an-hour curve. What we have adopted currently in the transportation system plan was this straight line. So we really wanted to use this study to determine what should really happen out there. And it is really important at the moment because Beaverton is doing the planning for this area. So now is the time to determine what the improvement will be. So the engineering analysis showed that this black dashed line is really the best alignment for going forward. This is a 35-mile-an-hour curve. We also did get feedback, or have gotten feedback over the years from Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, that they really would like to see an improvement here because it's a challenge for them to do this kink as it exists, as well as for any future transit in the area. So the proposal is to soften that curve. Oh, Chair Harrington, I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Yep, thank you. Can you help me understand, for the engineering work that you've talked about, how that has included some geographical or topical work, topographical work? Thank you. Because there's some pretty interesting hill slopes in that area. So is that part of it?
Exactly. Yeah. So they have these amazing programs where they bring in all of the topographic information, and then they can model the different curves and the different alignments. And if they go with the straight line, I think it was a 16% grade, which, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I understand that is very steep.
This is a really good example of, transportation planning. When we look at these maps, it looks great just to draw that straight line. But if you've actually driven on 175th and looked, this is going to require structure. And structure is very expensive to build, and it's very disruptive. So this was a real opportunity for us to do exactly what Chair Harrington is asking, and have engineers look at this, look at the topography, look at where wetlands are, and say, this is a much more reasonable infrastructure investment, and it allows us to refine our transportation system plan.
Next slide, please. This is the Tile Flat Road extension. Here we're just showing a corridor because we're not exactly sure where the alignment will go. But before we bring this back to you in ordinance form, we would determine where that actual alignment would go. The idea, and this came out of the Cooper Mountain Transportation Study, is that it provides a parallel route to Roy Rogers Road, which just means for people wanting to go north and west to Hillsborough and beyond, they can take this instead of taking Roy Rogers to Shoals Ferry to Tile Flat, or 175th and up and going further west, further north. So this blue area here is the River Terrace West Urban Reserve area that Tigard is currently doing planning for. So we think it's important to adopt the alignment of Tile Flat Road through here so that we can get that road included in the concept planning, and then we're all planning for it going forward.
I just want to chime in on this one too. In addition to providing that potential regional movement, it provides circulation within this part of future Tigard and connects it to existing Tigard as well. So it's important for building a network. Chair Harrington?
If I could chime in, just because of how I've heard from various constituents over the last week, in the area just to the west of Roy Rogers Road, across from Beef Bend Road, we do have in the rural-no reserve, so the undesignated area, we do have a bill filed at the legislature to ask. There's this tiny slice of I think it's not Laurel Road, maybe Lubbock. There you go. To ask for this little slice to be converted as a technical fix from rural reserve to undesignated, so that this Tile Flat extension could be planned. It is very much a technical fix. I just want to mention it should any constituents be listening or watching this meeting and broadcast. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And just to add to that, it's like what we call a flagpole, where it's just the 50-foot wide stretch of the property, and then the remainder of the property would remain in rural reserve. It would just be for that.
And the other point to make on this is that Tigard is actively planning for these two blue urban reserve areas, potentially with an eye on making an ask to add them to the urban growth boundary later this year. So once they've completed the concept planning, they will ask Metro for permission to do that. If Metro agrees, they will start comprehensive planning. So knowing where we need future road right-of-way is pretty important as we go forward with that planning.
And that would be part of that 2024 urban growth management.
It would be part of the 2021, actually. It's the mid-year cycle that we had not, we've never tried this before, but when Metro made the 2018 decision, they had allowed for this reconsideration in 3 years only for residential land. And so it's possible to add up to, and it's a very small, it's a small total acreage that can be added, and it has to be residential. And so that's what Tigard is considering right now.
Yep, I remember that now. It's because of concern that the econometric trends were developed from the Great Recession. Thank you for reminding me of that, Erin. I appreciate it.
And actually, it's even more confusing because, as you recall, probably it was the 2015 decision that created the mid-cycle, but then we went and did a full cycle in 2018 instead. So we're doing the mid-cycle in 2021.
Next slide, please. Now this map depicts the Basalt Creek Parkway extension. This is will become, I mean, this is pretty far in the future, but it would potentially become an overcrossing of I-5. Our analysis through this study showed that that probably would not be needed here until the Stafford area develops. So it could be pretty far in the future. However, Tualatin has annexed property all the way down to the boundary here where it says Green Hill Lane. So we wanted to do a refinement and figure out where this would actually need to go, as Chair Harrington said before, based on topography and the actual realities of on the ground. So this black dashed line would be the refined alignment here, and so that we can get the adequate right-of-way that we need in the right spot.
And this TSP amendment's important as well because of the segment between Grams Ferry and Boones Ferry Road. We have asked for federal funding before to build that segment. It's been up to 30% engineering design. Our engineering department's doing final design now, our capital projects, I mean. And so we know where that segment of the road is going to be. And obviously that impacts where the intersection is going to be at Boones Ferry Road. So now that we have that understanding of where Green Hill will be realigned to become Basalt Creek Parkway, it's important for our TSP to reflect that engineering analysis.
Next slide, please. This map is Shackelford Road extension. So the green is what is already adopted into the transportation system plan. It's more of a straight line here. And once we visited out there, we weren't sure that that would really work with the site distance issues on 185th. There's a big hill there. So the consultant team did take a look at that. And this is the refined alignment shown in the black dashed. It brings the intersection a little further down 185th to account for the hilltop here. And I believe they refined this so it's a shorter crossing of this wetland area. It still will be a really extensive bridge structure through there. And when we come back with these in the future, we can show you the picture that they made of this with they have this really great software that actually shows what the structure might look like on the property. So it's pretty interesting.
And we have had some constituent contact about this particular project. I think it's important to remember that it's already adopted into the transportation system plan. So this is just doing that engineering refinement, and it's not identifying the funding or prioritization of the project. That's a later decision for the board to make.
Next slide, please. This is the Cornelius Pass Road Extension Corridor. Again, we're just showing it in a corridor. We're still determining the actual roadway, but again, we would have an actual alignment when we bring it back. This, as Hillsborough, I'm sure you know, is currently planning for South Hillsborough, which ends here at Rosedale Road. This would be the extension of Cornelius Pass Road South, and it would connect here at Farmington and Clark Hill Road.
And this extension was identified in the South Hillsborough comprehensive planning work. And so we took it further and looked at the engineering analysis of it. We're also coordinating with Willamette Water Supply on this alignment because this is very close to their future pipeline alignment. So this is a good opportunity for us to coordinate with them and use right-of-way for two purposes.
Next slide, please. And this one depicts where we would be changing the functional classification of Tile Flat Road through here, if you can see my cursor. It's this black dashed line where Tile Flat Road comes up here as an arterial, and then it's a local road from Grabhorn to Clark Hill Road. And so we would want to upgrade that to a collector level roadway, and that helps it become this sort of around the mountain route that is more capable of handling increased traffic in the future. Next slide, please. And that is basically the end of our presentation overview of the Urban Reserves Transportation Study. And we do have a few questions for the board. First, do you have any concerns or need additional information about any of our recommended transportation system plan amendments? Do you have a preference for when the ordinances are filed? And do you have any additional questions or thoughts?
Thank you very much. Great presentation. Are there questions?
A couple, and this, Stephen, maybe is for you and your staff. It would be helpful as we see these urban reserves, they're pictorial shown, but the numbers of folks are in total, you show them throughout the projected growth, which I suspect is really low. We always project low, but if they were to incorporate into those cities, what would that mean in terms of those cities? For instance, I am particularly interested around Forest Grove, Cornelius, all through there. What is that going to look like in terms of population growth? The other question, real quickly, I've seen these. I mean, they've been on everybody's mind for a long time, and I'm pleased to hear you're working with the cities to see if you can't make certain that these are done in the best fashion. But as you know, we had high growth MSTIP funds dedicated before. I suspect there'll be a bit of tug on us to do that again. And so Stephen, has anyone from any of the cities asked that we go back through? I mean, they haven't told me this, but have they asked you about whether or not any of these might be a candidate for future allocations as we did on the other high growth areas?
Commissioner, we have not had those discussions yet with the cities. I think this study, again, it's good foundational work that I think will help set the stage for future conversations about how these projects may be funded through various programs. So the board would need to take an action to create a supplemental high growth program if that were an inclination for the board. And I think as we start our conversations about MSTIP 3F, we'll come up with a better name for that. But as we start talking about that next round, I think that's obviously going to be a question that's on people's minds about how the what we call the sort of base MSTIP program funding is allocated. And I suspect there will be interest in some sort of an additional request or support for cities as they try to build out some of these infrastructure needs.
Again, nobody has told me anything, but if they were to ask that, just one last quick question: what the percentage split as we have it today, is that working effective, or is that a little generous on our part?
I think it's a good question. I think the split was based on some assumptions about regional trips versus sort of locally generated trips, and that was the justification at the time for the cost share, the 2/3, 1/3 split that we're currently operating under in the high growth program. So I think that's again a conversation that we would probably need to have as we look at the projects and sort of evaluate again if there were to be some sort of cost sharing arrangement, what a fair share would look like for that. And I think in terms of population, Commissioner, I know we had an earlier slide that I think just showed some overall acreage numbers, and Aaron or Jessica, I don't know if you guys have population estimates associated with that.
That's something that we can put together and provide our staff who evaluates population and tracks that for Metro has that available. So we can put that together. It's interesting because while the reserves will have an effect on our transportation system, and it is quite a few housing units and potential employees when you look at it in total, the bulk of our future capacity is within the existing urban area.
Are there other questions? Nafisa, Commissioner Fye, Commissioner Willie, Chair. I have one question. Aaron and Jessica, is it possible for me to see the Shackelford software depiction that you discussed?
Absolutely, we can share that.
Okay, I'd like to see that. Thank you very much. I get a lot of questions, obviously, about that extension, so I appreciate it. Stephen, do you want to wrap this one up?
I would just say thank you. If there are no further questions, then I think we're ready to move on to our next topic.
Great. Well, Jessica, Aaron, thank you very much for your presentation. Well done. And Stephen, let's move on to the next topic, which is House Bill 2001.
Yeah, so again, back to talk a little bit more about implementation, as this bill that was adopted back in 2019, I believe, and rulemaking was completed late last year. So now we're working on our local implementation here at the county, and the cities, of course, in the metro area are all working through implementation as well. So we're doing quite a bit of coordination with the cities as we go through this. And I'm going to turn it over to Teresa Cherniak, who's our principal community planner, and Kim Armstrong, who's the senior planner, and they'll walk us through the presentation.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Chair Harrington and Vice Chair Treese and Commissioners. I'm Teresa Cherniak, Principal Planner with Community Planning. I'm joined with Kim Armstrong and Ann Kelly, who are the two senior planners working on the middle housing implementation, and we have others on the team as well. We've talked with you a couple times, as Stephen mentioned, about House Bill 2001, the middle housing bill that was adopted. It was in 2019. Rulemaking happened throughout 2020, and we are now starting implementation. So we wanted to brief you on where the rulemaking ended up, and the process that we're now undertaking to start implementation. And then also to get your input on some of the aspects of the work. This is a long-term project, so you'll be hearing more over the months and year to come on this. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is a longish presentation. Wanted to let you know what is coming. So we'll go over what's in the House Bill 2001 and talk some about housing need. We'll go through the specific provisions of the bill and the rules. We'll look at the timeline that we're undertaking for this work. We'll talk about a couple different paths to compliance. We'll talk about a set of guiding principles that we're hoping the board can weigh in on to guide the work that we do, and then talk about outreach and next steps. So next slide. So first, just the definition of middle housing. Just so we understand we're all at the same place. So for the purposes of this bill, middle housing was defined as housing types kind of in between detached single family homes on their own lots and larger apartment and condominium buildings. So these include the first five of the types here: duplexes, which is two units attached on one lot; triplexes, 3 on one lot; quad, 4 on one lot. Townhouses are attached houses in a row usually, and they are on their own separate lots, so they can be sold individually. Cottage clusters are typically small individual houses arranged around a courtyard, and they're all on one lot. So those are the 5 that are included in the bill. Accessory dwelling units we included here because they're also a type of middle housing, but they weren't addressed in the same way through the bill. But we do have those and encourage them in different ways. Next slide. Briefly, a reminder about the stated intent of the bill. It was passed in 2019, as I mentioned. The intent was to reduce barriers to those middle housing types by encouraging a more diverse mix of housing in typically single-family areas and providing housing options in those same areas for people who couldn't afford a detached home. For all of 2020, the state did undertake rulemaking, and we did participate in that. At the very end of December, those rules were adopted. And the rules do require adoption of our local regulations by June 30th of 2022. So we have a bit of time, but when we look at how much time we have, it's probably not as much as we think. If we don't have rules adopted by that time, then there is a model code that the state also adopt, and that would be imposed on us. Next slide. While not directly included in the intent of the legislation, there are some other potential outcomes that will come from the middle housing. We wanted to talk a little bit about that. So by allowing more diverse housing types, we're also hopeful that this will address housing affordability. When you increase the supply of housing and provide smaller units, we're hoping that that can address affordability. And then also looking at racial and income inequities. This has been revealed more in recent times, the effect that the type of zoning that has single family districts separate from other types of housing has created and made racial disparities worse. This happened throughout the US, where lack of opportunity and access to housing resulted in unequal outcomes and more segregated communities. So allowing middle housing won't fix historic inequities, but it can be part of the solution. Next slide. So the county has been working for a number of years to increase opportunities for housing development and reduce barriers that there might be in our regulations. Since there's long been a recognition that our housing need outstrips our supply. So this isn't new to us. And we see this work as a continuation of our work to encourage more housing and more affordability. We've long recognized that housing need exceeds supply, and that housing is getting less and less affordable in the region. And these statistics on this slide are just a few statistics to support those statements. So population is increasing, our housing stock is increasing as fast. Rents are increasing much faster. We don't have actually people's incomes, but the rents and home values are increasing faster than people's incomes. And we're expecting a lot more people in this area. And in general, this last figure is from the regional housing needs analysis that was just completed by the state that showed for Washington County, we have a lot of underproduction, and we have housing need for people who are homeless. And then adding on to that projected need through 2040, that we could need 90,000 new units by 2040. So all of these just go to show that housing is important, and doing what we can to help with that is critical for the county. Next slide. We also know that middle housing is a relatively small percentage of our housing stock, and this This graphic was from an earlier presentation that you had, I believe, from the state's Office of Economic Analysis, just showing for the region that we have, compared to detached single family, quite a small amount of this middle type of housing. And this is the type of housing that people may need or prefer over the next 20 to 25 years, driven in part by the kind of factors shown here. So we have smaller household sizes, smaller percentages of households with children, greater racial diversity, aging population that wants to age in place. So all of these kinds of factors support the focus on middle housing. Next slide. So now turning to what the bill and the rules require. One of the primary elements of the bill is that it requires large cities outside metro and counties and cities within metro to allow duplexes on every lot or parcel in the urban growth boundary where a detached single family is allowed. And so I should just really emphasize that this is for the urban unincorporated area. This doesn't apply to the rural area. So it's really urban focused. And then we must allow all middle housing types in areas within the EGB that allow detached single family dwellings. A lot of the rulemaking was looking at the distinction between those two things, and I'll get into the detail of that. It does allow us to exclude future development land, so land that is waiting to be planned by a city and annexed. We have a future development kind of holding zone that we apply, and so those lands are not included. And then we are allowed to regulate to comply with statewide planning goal protections. So the board's heard a lot about our Goal 5 significant natural resource regulations, and we are allowed to limit some middle housing based on the protections that we have for that and a couple other goals. Next slide. It's important to note that the bill doesn't eliminate our ability to allow detached single family dwellings. Those are still allowed. It does allow us to regulate the siting and design of middle housing within certain parameters. And it does allow the county to provide middle housing in other locations beyond what's required by the bill. So we can go beyond the bill, but we can't do less than what it requires. And what we can't do is discourage the development of middle housing through unreasonable costs or delay. And some of those costs and delays are defined through the rulemaking. Next slide. For duplexes, so two units on one lot, we have very limited discretion. We have to allow a duplex on every residential lot that would allow a detached single family house, regardless of the lot size. We'll need to use the same approval process and standards like setbacks and height as a detached house would have. And then there are limits to what we can require for parking. And this actually applies for all the middle housing types where we're limited to one space per unit that we can require. More can always be provided by a builder, but we can only require one per unit. Next slide. The other middle housing types, triplex, quadplex, townhouse, and cottage clusters must be allowed in all residential areas that allow detached houses. And again, we can have exceptions for goal protected lands. And there is also an exception for master planned communities where we can limit development of these types until the build out of the area and then apply the provisions. So once it's built out, it's fair game for all housing types, but potentially before that we could limit it. We'll need to follow the same approval process again as detached houses, and we can't have provisions like width, setbacks, and heights that are more restrictive than detached houses. So these are all the things that the jurisdictions must allow. The next slide, there's a little bit, so next slide, please. There's a little bit of discretion in applying siting and design standards. So this is something that we'll be looking at, because right now the county doesn't apply design standards to single family homes, but the bill and the rules do allow us to apply certain types of standards to the middle housing. And the idea here is to help these types of homes to fit in better, probably with existing neighborhoods. So the kinds of things that are listed here are the kinds of design standards that we can apply. Window requirements, where the garage can be off-street parking areas, that sort of thing. Again, the parking maximum is still at 1 off-street space per unit. And something that wasn't clear in the bill, but was clarified through rulemaking, is that local density maximums don't apply. Instead, the rules require jurisdictions to allow different middle housing types on lots, depending on the lot size. So if we can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. This is a big change for most jurisdictions. The rules would place minimum lot sizes on lots where the different housing types are allowed. So again, duplexes would be allowed on any lot that would allow a single family home. But for the other housing types, the table shows the housing types that would be allowed on existing lots of the following sizes. So triplexes on lots of 5,000 square feet or larger, typically. Quadplexes on lots of 7,000 square feet or larger. Townhouses are a little different, but we can't require an average lot size of greater than 1,500 square feet. And then cottage clusters on lots 7,000 square feet or larger. So we are right now doing an analysis of our different lot sizes throughout the county, and that's something that we'll be able to bring back to the board so we can show you where we have lots of these different sizes. There is another performance metric approach that we could take to minimum lot sizes and maximum densities. It's quite a bit more complicated than what's in the minimum compliance, and our preliminary analysis is that it actually might be more restrictive than what is allowed here, so that we're not at this point thinking that we would be recommending that. If we go to the next slide. So this map shows where the county currently allows detached single family houses. So this is a very broad brush look. And again, we'll bring back in the future a more detailed look, probably by community plan. So this is where we currently allow detached single family homes, and therefore where we would need to be allowing the middle housing. The county actually, unlike a lot of cities, we don't have exclusive single family districts, with the possible exception of our lowest density residential district, R5, which allows primarily single family, but you can build duplexes there through an additional process. So most of the middle housing types are already allowed in most of the county's districts that allow single family detached. We haven't seen a lot of development of these types to this point, but part of that may be addressed by some of the things that are in state law changes that go further in removing barriers to these types of development and allowing them on significantly more lots than would be currently allowed. Next slide. So something we want to emphasize is that allowing middle housing doesn't mean that it actually will be built. There are a lot of factors that go into individual and developer decisions on whether and what to build. So we had a lot of interest in this topic and did apply and received a technical assistance grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD, to do an economic and market feasibility study. So we're looking at trying to understand the factors that will affect the likelihood that middle housing will be built, and project where within our areas, our urban unincorporated areas, where middle housing may be economically feasible to build. And again, even feasibility doesn't mean that it will actually develop. So the study is looking at those other factors as well that might prompt someone to actually build. And then the final part of it is looking at likely impacts of county actions on middle housing feasibility to kind of fold back into our policy decisions as we move forward. So the study will help us, the public and infrastructure providers, and the Planning Commission and Board in better understanding all of how this might play out for the county and how county policy choices might affect that. We can go to the next slide. I mentioned at the beginning that we have to have adopted changes to our regulations by June 30th of 2022 at the latest, or else the model code will be applied. There likely will be a lot of aspects of the model code that we'll borrow, but given the complexity of our code and how the requirements are interwoven throughout it, like most jurisdictions that we're aware of, we likely are recommending that we modify our code in response to the changes to state law. So this timeline shows the process that we're going through, and we're still in phase one, which is scoping the project overall. We're doing a lot of research and analysis, making sure we understand everything that's in the rules, and starting to consider and analyze the different aspects of it so that we can start to develop different policy options that we can bring forward to the board. At the same time, we are still working on our public outreach plan and developing a good website, an interactive website, thinking about online open houses. So at this point, we're still outlining that public involvement plan. And we'd like to get some input from the board, and we can also then bring that, that plan forward to the board in the future. You'll see the code assistance project there in the kind of greenish. That work will fold into our phase two, where we start to develop the code concepts and policy decisions and bring forward policy decisions to the board. Then we'll get into actually writing code, and we'll start earlier, but that's where we'll get really serious about it. And then by the beginning of 2022, we expect that we will file an ordinance or several ordinances and start through the adoption process, giving the board plenty of time, Planning Commission and the board plenty of time before the adoption deadline. So we'll need to make sure to incorporate that all into the board's upcoming schedule, but thinking about that as being a pretty intensive time for board consideration. Next slide. A lot of what's in the rules is set, but there are some limited areas where there is discretion, and at a future work session, we are scheduled at this point in early April. We'll come back with an outline of some policy choices and recommendations, as well as more the findings of the feasibility study and how that folds into the policy recommendations. So some of the areas where we have discretion include whether or not to use the model code or portions of the model code in developing our rules, looking further at that minimum compliance versus the performance metric approach, And then a big part of it will be a decision on level and extent of design standards for middle housing. Next slide. At this time, we're hoping to get board feedback on a set of principles to help guide our work on this project. Our sense from the board, as we talked during the rulemaking, we briefed you a couple of times. Our sense was that there was general support for the intent of the bill and an expectation that we would implement it based on what was adopted. So the first principle we're proposing is just that we work in good faith to implement the new law and the rules and work toward an equitable distribution of middle housing across all county communities. Consistent with the county's equity resolution, we wanted to have as part of our work, considering how this work can advance the county's commitment to dismantling policies and practices that may have historically created obstacles to success for people of color, ethnic communities, and marginalized groups. So this is taken pretty much verbatim from the equity resolution, and we feel it's an important part of our work. We also are hoping to recognize that there are other statewide planning goals and that the need for housing be balanced against those other goals, such as Goal 5. We're considering impacts on affordability of housing when we develop regulations and not transfer burdens to other development and existing neighbors. Next slide. Another part of this is making sure that middle housing has and provides appropriate infrastructure, particularly road frontage improvements. This has been a concern of communities over time. And so we want to make sure that things like curbs, gutters, and sidewalks are still provided for these middle housing types. To implement a comprehensive community involvement program to educate and involve all community members and ensure an equitable and inclusive process. As I mentioned, we're still working on this, and any board feedback on that is definitely welcome. We have started working with Metro and the different cities in Washington County, as well as coordinating with other jurisdictions like Eugene and Bend on outreach to make sure that we have a consistent message. So we know that all the communities throughout the state are needing to do the same thing. And so if we share the same message, then people will be getting that better. We also are working with the other local jurisdictions as we develop regulations to share knowledge and to make sure we learn from each other and are on the same page. And as mentioned, developing county-specific regulations that fit within our code and developing those by the deadline of June 30th, 2022. As a final slide, the next one. We are developing an outreach and community involvement plan. We can bring that back and share that with the board. We'll make sure that we're outreaching to the full range of community members and interests. We do need to recognize, though, that there are some limits on our local discretion. And so as far as the outreach, the focus may be quite a bit on education and on those limited areas where we do have discretion, and that coordinating with other jurisdictions on their outreach is something that we're starting as well. So the next board briefing is expected in April, and we can talk about the results of the feasibility study, our outreach plan, and then where we have some early policy direction that we might ask the board for. So sorry, I misspoke. There's one more slide. Next slide, please, which is just the questions we have for the board. These questions and any others that you have, any other input that you have are welcome. So if you have any input on our schedule for the work, the outline for the outreach that we've talked about just briefly. Any thoughts on the guiding principles, and if there's additional information that we could bring you that would be helpful moving forward. And with that, I will end my presentation and be available for questions.
Thank you, Teresa. Are there questions? Chair Harrington is nodding her head. You may need to unmute yourself there.
Yes, I have. Thank you. I need to go back to the draft guiding principles. The second one, work towards an equitable distribution of where middle housing is allowed across all urban unincorporated communities, e.g., and then you talk about a lot in community Y will be treated the same as in community Z. So to me, that isn't distribution as much as it is making sure that we're providing equitable building or equitable requirements across the entire geography. So that word distribution really trips me up, particularly because I'm thinking about how one reason why the state legislature did this work was that these housing types are needed everywhere in every way. So that's really the guiding principle that I'm looking for. So I'm leaving that up to you all to figure out the good phraseology for that, but the word distribution didn't work for me. And then so that was all I had on the guiding principles. I do have one, I think, community design comment that isn't specific to middle housing, but middle housing could make the need more present. And this goes back years. Mayor Kidd from Forest Grove back in the early, the late 2020 years, you know, my first term as a Metro councilor, 07, 8, 9, 10, really was a strong spokesperson for the fact that with our changes in solid waste considerations, such as moving from source separated recyclables to commingled, the collection bins got bigger, which put pressure on the space needed for the garbage can and the recycling can, and then the yard debris containers. So when we talk about having more duplexes and whatnot, space gets to be a bit of a problem. I'm convinced that we cannot and should not expect that these garbage bins are going to be kept inside. I think we need to encourage that the planning codes address explicitly the need for the space for these bins, and that includes requirements for screening from the street. We shouldn't push that on the homeowner once these solutions are designed. So for example, if it's a townhouse that has a flush backside, or maybe even a yard, but then a front entryway with the driveway on the front, the design needs to incorporate having some screening to allow for those cans to be on the front side of the property if those middle units don't have yard access. So I think we need to be really invested in doing some of this design work. And I think this is work that can be done and shared across all of the jurisdictions in Washington County, certainly, but beyond, because this problem exists in all of our jurisdictions, and is one where I think we need to be willing to provide these requirements in the urban unincorporated areas that may be unusual compared to our track record. So other than that, the schedule looks fine to me. The work needs to be done. It's listed on the board initiatives out through 2022 to make sure that we have recognized this. I think you've done a good job on the guiding principles, and I only had that one consideration. So thank you very much. Job well done.
Great. Thank you.
Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I need to kind of go back to the start a little bit. So you talk about, your slide depicted the missing middle. So what exactly is that missing middle? Is that a value, an occupancy standard? What is that?
So the term was coined, I'm not sure when, maybe 10 years ago, by someone as it was called missing middle because it in years past, in older neighborhoods, you'll find some of these smaller housing types that are interspersed in a neighborhood. So things like duplexes or courtyard apartments or that sort of thing. So it's really the housing that has more units in it than one single family home would have. And so it's not a single family home. It's not a multifamily condominium apartment building sort of thing. It's in between that. It's attached housing from typically probably 1 to 4 units that is often in older neighborhoods, but not often seen in newer neighborhoods where our more in the suburbs, we don't have it as much. So it's really about number of units all attached. Does that help at all?
I was going to say, Michael, if you want to go to slide 3, that's where we have a few images and the descriptions. And I would reinforce, I think, something Teresa just said too. I think these are housing types that were pretty common prior to the adoption of what we call sort of Euclidean single-use district zoning. And so they were much more common. And so I think this is sort of a recognition that those housing types were valuable contributors to a range of different housing types and income levels in our communities, and that we essentially kind of wrote them out of the rules at some point. So now this is sort of bringing them back into the mix.
Yeah, I get that. And I certainly understand the need. I mean, one of your graphs showed that we need to manage growth actually you said 2040, and you think, wow, 2040, that's a long time out. And then you go, well, no, it isn't. It's, it's 18 plus years out. It's we can almost see that from here. 90,000 new units. And so mentally, I'm thinking through how many new units we had planned for South Hillsborough when we were designing that. And now that is in full build out mode. You got River Terrace, we got Cooper Mountain. North Plains is putting in 300 plus new units. And every one of those developments are doing a good job of mixing the housing types, single family, multifamily, all of those kinds of things. Again, that was pretty much mandated on them, but it's something that that's important. And you add all of those up together, I don't think we put much of a dent in that 90,000. So that is a Herculean lift to anticipate 90,000 new households in basically the next 18 years. And so I'm not necessarily opposed to the concept of converting single family neighborhoods into the opportunity to add duplexes. I just don't want this to be too prescriptive. So I was hearing one of your slides said limits on local discretion, and that's slide 20. And I guess I'd like to know more about what are the limits on our local discretion. And it concerns me always that the state is getting into mandating how we manage our growth, how we manage our housing stock. And that's always concerning to me too, because quite frankly, they don't know how to do it like we know how to do it. So I'm a little concerned about the limits on local discretion. So could you give me a little bit more detail on that?
Sure. So most of what I talked about in the presentation are requirements that the state has imposed on all local jurisdictions over a certain size. So the requirement to allow a duplex on every lot where a single family home is allowed, and to allow those different housing types, the duplex, quadplex, triplex, townhouse, on lots of a certain size. Those are requirements. So we don't really have discretion there on whether or not to allow that. That the state has imposed that across the state now. Where we do have discretion is in how we might look at our goal 5 areas, and where we might limit development in our natural resource areas. So we could say the middle housing is not allowed in those areas. We have discretion on what design standards we might want to add. So it's that kind of thing where there's discretion. Where there's not discretion is the basics of the requirements.
Well, yeah, and I understand that we have to walk a fine line here. Again, you know, I realize that the chair raises a good point about where we're going to put the garbage and recycling plans, but to me, that's getting just a little bit myopic on. We're telling somebody how they're going to have to design and build their house, and I'm certainly not a fan of that. I guess yeah, I'll just conclude it with we're walking a really, really fine line here, and I'd like us to try and not be overly prescriptive to be in compliance with the state law on this. So
I didn't suggest that we tell them how to design it, only that they have to provide for it. There's a big difference.
I wanted to interject just to make it clear on the discretion with design that we have to have the same rules for a single family that we do for the middle housing. So just to take, for an example, you know, garbage can screening, we currently don't require that for single family. So if we wanted to do it for middle housing, we'd also have to require it for single family. We just have to make sure the rules are the same. I just wanted to make sure that that's clear going forward.
Thank you. Are there other comments? Commissioner Rogers, Commissioner Fye?
Yeah, please, thank you. Oh, no, go ahead.
Go ahead, Roy.
No, I hate to jump in front of you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll be brief and quick. My comment is along the lines of the guiding principle, the equitable requirement of middle housing. You know, Washington County, we are the most diverse county in Oregon. Therefore, we have multiple languages that our residents and our constituents speak. So I'm hoping that we will provide some of these rules and laws and regulations that we set forth, and also disseminate the opportunity available for people in the multiple languages that we speak here, so that people are, so that the materials is accessible and that people know more about this opportunity. So that's one. And then, you know, I don't know if this is, and also, yeah, like any of the community outreach or the community conversations that you will have, you know, to provide some language access for the different communities that exist here. So not just to go to, you know, CBOs, but actually intentionally reach out to the communities that are homeowners here in Washington County. And then the other comment, I won't comment about the local discretion. We'll wait what the ordinance looks like and then provide more feedback on that one. But the other comment I had, and this is a concern I heard from our constituents, was about the parking situation and allowing, I know some of the rules have changed around the parking rules have changed to allow more space for middle housing. And I'm not sure if the rules are the same for unincorporated areas. I think cities were called out, if I remember correctly. But if it's the same, are we requiring per space? And this, if this is going to come out during the ordinance, I can wait too. But if it's per space, let's say I have a 3,000 square feet, how many parkings is allowed per that space? Or is it per duplex, like being that prescriptive? So that's one question I had. And then now the concern I heard from people are, you know, especially in my district, there is, and the area I live in currently, there's a lot of people that own their own homes for the past 40, 50 years. And then we put in more development, and what they see is people parking in their streets. And now people are retired. So it's really concerning, is what I heard, that they see, you know, different people parking in front of their houses that they don't even know. So it sort of infringed on their safety because they didn't know who was parking. So I'm interested in that, and also would suggest to sort of have a dedicated conversation about the parking situations, so that people know what to expect, so that there's no development going with no parking and people have to park somewhere, which is somebody else's, in front of somebody else's house. So those are some of the comments, and the things I want to flag for you is that the parking situation is really going to be a big for the community, especially for middle housing, and limitations. So as much as we can be, you know, generous in terms of what we require in terms of parking spaces, you know, will be really value adding to people who are homeowners who do not want to participate in the middle housing development, but then they, you know, they're not going war with their neighbors who want to utilize this opportunity of taking advantage of the middle housing.
Yeah. Yeah, parking was the hottest button topic during rulemaking. I think almost every meeting ended up with half an hour or more discussion about parking, and a lot of concern about the limit on the number of parking spaces that we're allowed to require. And on the other side, the concern was that requiring parking can add a lot of cost to housing. And so I think during the rulemaking, that was the balance that was being discussed. And I have no doubt that that will be a big part of the conversation when we talk with community members. Yeah. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you. Commissioner Rogers?
Or I won't repeat what I did a year or two ago when this was all proposed, because it's now passed, but I didn't like it then and I don't like it today. Not the idea of adding additional housing, but the way it was done on the infill basis. Parking is just one issue. I appreciate that. That's going to, as I said at those times, and I repeat it again today, once people start to see that infill, they're going to be very mad. And to those of you who might be on the commission at that time, I hope you you realize that there are going to be some real discussions. But forgetting all that, parking is an issue in the infill areas. I like what some of the cities proposed. What we were talking is, how about these new areas that if we're trying for housing type, and I think Commissioner Willie was getting at that, if it's stock numbers of units, can't we put them in the new areas so that we get more infill? Possibilities than just duplexes and triplexes in established neighborhoods. I've been a huge proponent of home ownership. Very discouraging on home ownership if you've got your investment wrapped up there and all of a sudden you have a couple of 3 triplexes, quadplexes in your neighborhood. It's very difficult. But so parking infrastructure issues, we might take a look when we come back at what that means to clean water services. And Diane would tell you, and some of the cities who are developing would know as well, that they just request a bigger pipe on everything they develop, and which means your costs. And if I were anyone even doing any work, I would say I need 12 inches or better. And you say, why do you need 12, 16 inches? Well, I do that because you're going to pay for it versus it being part of a development. So we need to know what that means in terms of infrastructures. I know Hillsborough is about the common for them to ask for the larger pipes because Clean Water pays for it. We're hearing, and we're going to hear a lot more about rentals and Airbnbs as these units come into neighborhoods. What's that going to mean? What's it going to mean in terms of how we're going to at all regulate those? I mean, I don't know. If you start tearing houses down, I also, Teresa, I think you answered this. I've heard a couple presentations, but for many areas in Washington County, I think we're the king and queen of homeowners associations and HOAs. Is that what they are? Yeah. What does that mean? Can they have covenants, which I think they do, or will there be more HOAs who have covenants that say you want to develop in the neighborhood? Are they overrode? Does that get overridden by state law? And if it does, is there any sort of court action that the HOAs can take against their members in terms of anyone who says, well, I've been here, I'm leaving for wine country, I can get a lot more value putting in a number of units for developers. So what's that mean? So summarizing it all, I think the parking is a great question. I think the rental aspect of these, the infrastructure aspect of how it's going to look, as far as the timing of the work, good. I don't have any questions. The need for the units, I don't have any questions about that either. It's just how you put them in and where. I don't think I have anything more. I know it's hard, very hard.
Could we please come back to what Commissioner Rogers was saying about pipes? Because when we had this presentation last, we did call in Clean Water Services. And as you may recall, they spoke about how the provisioning does not need to be upscaled. Their infrastructure can accommodate it. So I just think that there need to be some practical reminders, not only for us, but as you move forward with this, because I keep hearing people articulate this picture of fear that this is going to set people helter-skelter. So I'm asking the technical team to please ensure you have some straightforward FAQs available in the next presentations, as well as for the public in a proactive manner versus having that information available in a reactive manner.
Sure. If I can just say I think the next presentation that we give will help quite a bit in that, where we talk about in the feasibility study and how much middle housing is actually even feasible to be built. And what we're finding is it's quite a low number. So the state assumption through the bill and the rulemaking was that these would be developed incrementally over time in neighborhoods, that we wouldn't get large numbers of this. And that's preliminarily playing out through our feasibility analysis, where even just what's feasible is between 1 and something like 9 or 10% in different communities. And that's feasible versus what would actually get built. So we're expecting pretty low numbers. And so we can talk more about that. We have talked with Clean Water Services and Tualatin Valley Water District and some of the smaller water districts we've yet to talk with, and then with our transportation folks. And the expectation still is it's incremental and will be able to be addressed over time as the development happens. But we can bring back more solid evidence the next time we meet.
Yeah, just a follow up point. I don't disagree that it should be fact-based at all. I have always been a little curious on how certain cities can say we want the larger pipes every time they do a development, and some don't. And so as you have infill and changes, and we're still a society based upon a capitalistic system, at least presently. If that's the case, people can always go to the highest and best use. And these single-family houses were not. I mean, pipes were designed for a certain size of activity, not multi. So, point well taken. I don't disagree. I think a factual understanding of how that works would be good.
Thank you. I'd just like to add one comment, and that is I think that the Home Builders Association, what I've heard from them is that the numbers that you've talked about in relationship to percentages, that they are reporting the same type of information there. The one piece I'd add is in your guiding principles, you talk about we intend to implement the new law. I think if we're going to be using that document separately, it should say in order to meet the need for middle housing, or something that's a little bit more definitive about what the purpose is. Are there any other comments?
I wanted to make one last thing I forgot to say was, I don't know if this is the ordinance conversation when it comes up or now, but to just foresee and mitigate neighborhood disruptions, is there a timeline for per development, like within 1 year? If I'm developing my house, I have 1 year to finish or so. No, I see you shaking your head, Kim. Is that something we can set forth or is that an ordinance conversation?
I'm not even sure that I follow what the two of you are referring to, so I need a little help.
So I'll just clarify or unless you want to jump in, Kim. What I'm referring to, Madam Chair, is that if I wanted to develop my own house, how long do I have to finish that development? Because if it takes me 5 years and I have, disrupting my neighborhood, I just feel like the neighbors need some kind of understanding of when this development is going to be complete, or when is the end time, rather than having materials all over, people come in one day or the other or another month. So I'm just thinking that, just to calm people's nerves down that are not for this bill or feel like they're being forced to this bill that got passed, how do we mitigate those concerns, and then also, empower people to utilize this bill that passed. So just to mitigate both sides, if there is if that is in our responsibility as a county commissioners to implement a timeline for development to be complete.
Do you have an answer to that, Teresa, Stephen, Kim?
I was just going to say, we don't currently do that for single family residential in terms of identifying a discrete window of time in which you have to complete your construction project. So again, there may be some issue of being consistent amongst the different housing types if we were to look to implement something like that. Building permits typically are issued and are valid for 6 months as long as the construction continues. However, they can be extended if there are needs for extension of that. And it is, I think a builder would say they typically can build a house from scratch in 4, 5, 6 months typically. But in a case like these where there may be retrofit work happening or there's demolition and then reconstruction, the project timelines could extend out a little bit. So it's a good question, and I think it's just one that we'll need to spend a little bit of time thinking through. So I appreciate you pointing it out.
I'd also add that we tend to find that once builders get going, they want to get going and get it done with as fast as possible. It's in their economic interest to do that. Once they line up all the subcontractors, it's in their best interest to get it done as fast as possible. But there are those unique circumstances where something goes wrong or their financing doesn't come through where that doesn't happen. But most of the time they want to get in and out as fast as possible.
Yeah, I was going to just agree with exactly what Andy said. We let the economics of the project certainly drive the speed of the project, and I don't think any developer, anybody that's going to invest any kind of money in multifamily or duplexes, they're going to want to get that online just as soon as they possibly can and get the cash flow going. And again, like they pointed out. We have to apply the same rules to single family as we do to these kind of projects. And so we need to be very careful that we don't have unintended consequences on this. So, yeah.
Are there other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much, Teresa, Kim, Stephen, for the presentation. Thank you for taking the feedback. It is 10:30 now. We're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. My understanding from Tanya is that we can start early with our next presentation from Health and Human Services. Is that correct, Tanya?
That is correct. Or we could take the 15-minute break now and start at 10:45 with
That's what I'm
Health and Human
suggesting.
Services.
So let's go ahead and take our 15-minute break now. We'll reconvene at 10:45 and we'll move through the rest of our agenda. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kevin, folks, we're going to step out of the auditorium for just a couple minutes, but we'll be right back.
All right, sounds good. good first session this morning.
It went well. We got a lot done, or at least
Yeah.
a lot of presentations.
Yes. So, and yeah, so now we'll just have this one, and then it should allow a longer lunch for you guys.
Right. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. And I'm trying to work with my other screen. I got the advice from Jerry to not to look at the camera, not look at my other screen.
Yeah, I do that too. So I have this on.
Yes.
All right, go ahead, Madam Vice Chair.
Well, welcome back. I hope you all had a good break here and are refreshed. Looks like some of us may have even changed clothes. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Marnie Kyle to introduce the next topic.
Good morning, board.
I'm just going to do a quick introduction. So I think this is Nick O'Coon, and Nick, you can wave so they can see who you are. Nick is our new behavioral health division manager. So Nick participated. We did a national search and had a lot of great candidates, but Nick clearly came out on top, and we're thrilled to have Nick in this new position. He's been with the behavioral health program for 11 years and really supported Kristen during that time as the sort of second manager for the behavioral health division. So, and as you know, Kristen is now in a position to do what she really loves. And anybody that has been to the Hawthorne Urgent Care Center knows what she's really, really good at is special project supervisor, special project management. So we're thrilled that we can have Kristen stay with us and stay in this capacity. So today, Kristen's here to give you an update on the Center for Addictions Triage and Treatment, affectionately known as the CAT Center. So I will turn it over to Kristen, but just wanted to have a chance to introduce you to Nick as well today.
Thank you, Marnie. Appreciate that. Good morning, Chair Harrington, Vice Chair Treese, Commissioners. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about our Center for Addictions Triage and Treatment. This has been a project that we've been working on for a while, and I apologize for not getting back in front of you earlier. This little thing called a pandemic happened, and that slowed us down a bit. So I'm here today to really update you on the work that's happened, and I want to do a little level set. Today, I want to talk about the process, everything that we've been doing, all the work we've been doing, who we've been engaging, how we've approached this project. And then I'm going to be coming back in April, and I will actually give you the full information about what's going to be included, what's in the feasibility study, all that information. So today is really just to hopefully help explain how we approach this and who we've involved so that you have that understanding and when we go into the April meeting. Can I get the next slide, please? So CAT, as Marnie said, we affectionately call it, it is the Center for Addictions Triage and Treatment. It's a project that really is designed to increase intensive treatment capacity for substance use disorders in Washington County. The plan is really to create a comprehensive center of addictions treatment that will add to the infrastructure that we have. Next slide, please. So we like to kind of joke that it's kind of a Fred Meyer model. It's a one-stop shop where you can enter the center, have an assessment, and then be triaged to the service that is most correct for your needs. And really it's centering on immediate and rapid access to care. We know when it comes to addictions that rapid access to care is critical in terms of engaging and successful treatment. So one of the things that we have really grounded on is that this center will focus on intensive services that are lacking in our community. We do not want to disrupt the existing service system, but the existing service center system is really largely outpatient in nature. So this center would really be to fill in those intensive services. So we're looking at things like sobering, withdrawal management, which is often referred to as detox, residential services, stabilization services, both residentially based as well as outpatient based. And then auxiliary supports. What are the other services and supports that people need in order to be successful in their recovery journey? Now, one thing I want to mention is that assessment and triage was always part of the concept, but this has really it's really become centered to us with the passage of Measure 110. So Measure 110 requires that assessment and triage centers are created in local communities. And that happened after we had already started developing this concept. So we were really delighted to see that we can merge both Measure 110 and this concept together to really have a responsive system for our community. Next slide, please. I know that most of you are very aware of this, but there is a real community need for these services. The impacts are not just to individuals and family members, it's to systems, it's to the community. We really have a lack of resources. I'm going to show you that in just a second. And what happens is that we see people ending up in the jails and the emergency rooms for substance use disorders. And that's not what they were designed to do. So we really are needing some resources that are appropriate for the needs of our community members who use substances. Next slide, please. So this, I showed this in a previous presentation back in, I think it was about December of 2019. It's been a while. But this is really just demonstrates the lack of intensive services that we have in Washington County. We have no sobering beds, no detox beds, 13 men's residential beds and 15 women's residential beds. But it's important to know that those women residential beds are limited to women who have children, young children with them. And so for women who are not seeking services with young children, there are no resources for residential services in Washington County. Now, we did do some research into what would be about the right size or the need for a community our size, and really looked at the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to see if they had recommendations. And so those recommendations are here, but understand those are recommendations for the community at large. And what we're really looking at is the publicly funded system. Next slide. So one of the things that became really clear to us very early in this project is just how widespread the impact of substance use is on individuals. So we did make a real effort to include the voice of individuals with lived experience, as well as system partners and others, individuals, subject matter experts, and you'll hear about that in a second. But what we learned is that even people who we didn't realize substance use had impacted them were talking about how they had lost family members, just the overall impact. And so this just was really impactful to us in terms of reminding us of the human cost of substance use and untreated substance use in our community. Next slide. So we organized our feasibility study into various areas of focus. First, we wanted to do an assessment of the need and existing services that are available in our community. Then we wanted to create really foundational guidance that would inform the work going forward. And so we call those our building blocks. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But our building blocks really are the values that underlie all the work that we're doing to create this center. We also chose to take a phased approach, which I'll discuss in a bit. Understanding that resources and needs are going to change, and that we're still in that early kind of feasibility assessment phase of it. We wanted to think in terms of how could this project progress over time. Then we looked at developing recommendations for the services, both what's included as well as the number of beds, the types of services that are included, which then led into some work on the facility. How big does the facility need to be? What are the key features of the facility? Which then, of course, goes into the financial analysis. Once we know how big the building needs to be, we can start looking at how much is it going to cost to run and operate and to build. Next slide, please. So I'd like to spend a few minutes just talking about who is involved with this project. Just a quick preview. At this point, we've had over 180 individuals involved in informing the center development to date. And at least 100 of those have been through community focus groups, individuals with lived experience. So I'm going to go through each of these and explain the role of each and who's involved in each. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the leadership team. The leadership team is largely county employees. This is a group that is organizing the project. So we've been working together for about 18 months now in terms of thinking about who to engage, how to engage, conducting interviews with organizations and individuals, doing focus groups with community members. Like I said, it's largely county employees with Walt Peck, who is a contracted project consultant. Walt has assisted us with other projects such as the Hawthorne Walk-In Center. He's also helped with the Wingspan Event Center. So he's got a really good understanding of these sorts of large projects. This list is not comprehensive. It's actually been added to recently. John Cook has been promoted to undersheriff, and as such, we recruited the new chief deputy, Carlin Degman, to join the leadership group, and really excited to have her perspective, especially since she's worked as the jail commander in the past, and there's a lot of need for determining how to align these services with the jail and other community corrections. And then we also added Stuart Spafford, who is a project manager with facilities. He's an architect by training and has joined the leadership team to help us think in terms of the facility side of the work. Next slide, please. Our program development work group is a group that we convened of local stakeholders as well as individuals with lived experience. These folks work in various areas such as provider agencies. We have representatives from the Oregon Health Authority, from our local coordinated care organizations, which will largely fund the services. And we kind of affectionately call these folks our worker bees, because these are the folks that really are diving into the various topic areas and making the recommendations based on their experience, their knowledge about things like the clinical model, best practices, size. When you think about a residential treatment program, what is the ideal size of the milieu so that people can feel safe and really focus on the services. So this group has been a pretty cohesive group, and our attendance has been amazing throughout. Next slide, please. We also convened a steering committee. Our steering committee is local leaders that really can hold us accountable for making sure that all aspects of this development are really integrated with the rest of our system, that we're really considering this from a much higher 30,000 foot level in terms of integration with other systems, partnerships, things that will either make the center work or really could be a problem in the future. So they really do hold us accountable and provide us really just in-depth feedback about what we should be considering, what we shouldn't be considering. We have elected officials on here. We have representatives of our culturally specific provider association on this group. And they've been a really powerful group about really informing the project. And we then, the leadership team then takes this back and brings it back to the steering or to the program development work group to make sure that those perspectives are incorporated. Next slide, please. While we wanted this program to be a program that was built from the ground up and really responsive to the needs of Washington County, we also recognize that there's a great deal of knowledge out in the community and across the United States. And so we spent a fair amount of time reaching out to other organizations and interviewing them and asking them what works in their programs, what doesn't work, what would they do different if they were to start all over again. What should we be considering as we move forward with the project? And these various organizations have been tremendously helpful, incredibly willing to share knowledge, staffing, funding, all the sort of detail that's been really helpful in informing the center. And we've reached back out to them several times, and they've always been willing to to talk with us and share their knowledge. So we've been very appreciative of that. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned before, one of the things we wanted to do is really hear community voice, and especially the voice of individuals with lived experience. So we took an approach of doing a lot of community focus groups. This list is not complete. We actually have a few more that are either in process or have happened since this list was generated. But we wanted to go out and really talk to individuals who have been through the treatment system and say, you know, what worked, what didn't work, what should we be thinking about, how should we organize the services, what do we need to think about in terms of the client experience. And so all of that information we collected and brought back and included in our feasibility study. We also discussed it with our program development work group and with our steering committee to make sure that we were very aligned in terms of the recommendations that ultimately are going into the feasibility study. Next slide, please. So just really quickly, our process and timeline. We actually started this. I came before the board in July of 2019 and presented the concept. That was quite a while ago. From there, we established the leadership team, started doing some stakeholder outreach and some organizing of the project. Then we put together a data work group, which consisted of hospital representatives from the sheriff's office, all these different places where we thought we could get data that could help inform the project. So we collected that, did an analysis. I came back before the board in December of 2019 and presented some of the information and made sure that it was still a priority of the board for us to move forward with the feasibility study. At that point, we developed our program development work group. Next slide. And then COVID hit. And so we went on pause for a while. Around July, we decided it was time to really just march forward in a different socially distanced video meeting sort of way, which we were able to do. And so we reconvened the work and started moving forward with it again. Did a lot of our focus groups at that point, a lot of our outreach to the other organizations. And then what we did is we created our building blocks. So our building blocks, again, I think I mentioned this, they're a set of core values that inform the project, every aspect of the project going forward. And I'll touch on that in just a sec. From there, we established the steering committee and then really dove into the size and scale so that we could get into that facility information that would help inform the overall cost. And facilities joined the work at that point. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about some of the areas that will be included in the study. So when you see our study, you'll see all of these different areas included. One of our big dilemmas is when we talk about services, how big do we go? We know that the need is really tremendous, but we also know that there's going to be financial limitations to the center. So which services do we include? How do we think about the scalability of the project so that we can expand in the future? How can we think about flexibility so that if the service needs of our community members change over time, we can be flexible and shift the program so that it does focus on what the needs are at that time. And then perhaps one of the biggest areas that we've spent a lot of time talking about is how do we align and complement other services and supports that are already available in the community. Again, we don't want to supplant services that exist, but we do want to complement and really align with those. Next slide. So our building blocks, like I said, these are really the values that underlie the work. So we spend a fair amount of time with the program development work group building these building blocks and determining what was going to be our guiding values and principles going forward. We then shared this with the steering committee to make sure that they were aligned with the building blocks. And the building blocks really are informing certain areas like accessibility, the services, the client experience, how the facility should feel and flow for people receiving services there. and safety. And when we say safety, we're not necessarily talking about just the physical safety of the staff and the community members who receive services, but we're also talking about trauma-informed care. How do we make it feel safe for the individuals so that they can arrive on site and receive services in a way that doesn't trigger trauma from previous experiences and is safe and supportive for them. So that was a core value we developed early. Next slide. We do have, well, we have the building blocks, which are values and principles to help inform it. We decided very early on that we were going to build on a foundation of leading with race. It's a core value for the county. It's something that we know is incredibly important with the diverse community that we're going to serve. So we wanted to really base all decisions, all aspects of the program on equity. We actually created and adopted an equity tool, and that tool will be used, assuming we go forward into the next phases of the project. We'll apply that tool to every aspect of decision making. We did very quickly determine that we needed to stop using terms like BIPOC, because BIPOC's too big and catch-all, and it doesn't really get to the needs of individuals. And we wanted to really focus on how do we be very culturally responsive to the individuals of our community. We did go back and take a second look at our data to look and see if we could disaggregate it a little more and understand where the gaps in services are. So that will help inform. We're also reaching out to culturally specific provider organizations that do provide substance use treatment and have interviews scheduled with them to think about best practices and how do we incorporate those into the center going forward. We also reached out specifically to various communities and did focus groups with those communities. And from those focus groups, we actually invited several people to join our program development work group so that we could make sure that we had diverse perspective in the work of that group. Next slide, please. So we phased out the project, and right now we're in phase one, which is the feasibility assessment, which we're just wrapping up. We'll have a document created and to you prior to the April meeting that will summarize all of this work. And then hopefully we'll be moving into phase two. You'll notice that I've got a green circle there for a pilot project. And the reason for that is with the implementation of Measure 110, which requires the creation of assessment and triage centers, their timeline is quite accelerated compared to when we would be able to open a building. And so in thinking about that, we believe that we could start with a pilot project, working with our provider network to implement that assessment and triage requirement, and then fold it into this center as a whole. So it'll be a pilot that will roll in to the center as we open it in the long run. Phase three would be the actual build, provider onboarding, opening of the center. But then we wanted to add a phase four. And the phase four is a recognition that the work doesn't end when the center opens. What we want to do is think about how do we build that interconnectiveness of the CAT with all the other systems in the county. The ones that are represented here are not fully inclusive. There's other systems, the jail, criminal justice system, all those other systems. But what we want to do is work very deliberately and methodically to create a system of care that has a no wrong door access. So if somebody still goes to the emergency room and is presenting with substance use, we can bring them over to the CAT and engage them in the CAT. The other thing that I'll mention is in phase three, you'll see a little square or a circle for CAT South. And the goal there is to really integrate our Tigard Recovery Center, which we recently purchased purchased our other half from Clackamas County into this project. And so we want to think about how that building could best be used to provide an access point to residents in South County depending on where CAT is located ultimately. So we really want to think about how do we have multiple access points and really have an integrated system with all the resources that we have. Next slide, please. So when we went to the program development work group and asked them what services should we include in this project, they came back with about 8,000 different services. And so, and that is an exaggeration, but it was a very, very long list of different services that they said really should be included in the center. So we realized that we needed to have a way of organizing those. And so we organized them into buckets. And so core are the services that have to be included in CAT, or else CAT really isn't CAT. So that's all the ones that I talked about at the very beginning about sobering, detox, stabilization, those sorts of things. But then we identified that there's certain services that are really complementary and augment the services of core. So those are things like supported employment, outpatient treatment, mental health treatment, peer-delivered services, all those sorts of things that are really would increase the chances of success for the participants of CAT. Then there are the services that perhaps don't need to be run by the CAT service provider, but rather could be co-located on site, but operated by community partners. So you think about something like medical care. If we could have some space available for one of our partners, say Virginia Garcia, to come on site and provide some care to the residents who are receiving services at CAT, that would be incredibly beneficial because we know that our community members have complex needs, and their needs are not just substance use treatment. It's substance use treatment and physical health and dental health and all of those. So wanting to think about, could we also offer some co-located services that are integrated and offered on site, but maybe by a different provider? And then finally, there was this long list of everything else that would be really beneficial to think about in terms of, helping to support our community members who receive services at CAT. And then we realized that we've got community partners out there, but what we need to do is really formalize the relationships with them. So you think about something like an individual who is really needs detox services, but is refusing to go in because they're not sure where their dog is going to go during the time that they're in detox services. We could develop partnerships with an animal service organization so that that is attended to, but it doesn't have to happen on site. So really thinking about bucketing the services in those sorts of ways. The other benefit of bucketing services this way is as we're thinking about the financial cost of building the center, we can think about what can we afford now, what can we possibly afford later, what can we add on over time, and it just helps us think about ways of scaling the project based on the resources that are available. Next slide, please. So we did do a fair amount of work on the size and scale, the number of beds, the number of services that would be included, what are the facility features that would have to be part of the program. Again, I can't say it enough, we've really emphasized on needing to think about a flexible design that can adjust with the needs of our community over time. Maybe we'll find that we don't need as many stabilization beds, but we need more detox beds. Can we build the facility in a way that those beds can be converted and used to expand detox services and reduce other services? So those are the sort of conversations that we're having. We've been partnering with facilities at this stage and have the project manager assigned, which has been a wonderful addition. And then we've also engaged with LRS architects to do some of the conceptual design work and really determining what is the square footage that would be needed to build this program, and what would the land requirements be in order to build this program. And so from there, we'll develop a cost estimate. Next slide. So of course, a big part of this is the financial analysis. So we know what resources we have secured, which is carry forward funds that are held in the behavioral health program. But we also know that there's a fair amount of potential resources coming into the system here. So Measure 110 will likely bring additional resources into the community. The opioid settlement funds, that is really designed to help respond to the impact that opioids have had on our community. So we're looking at those sorts of resources, and there may be more. It's a really dynamic time right now. We're hearing that there may be some federal resources that may become available, and so we're looking into those as well. As we think about the cost, there's really two sides of it. There's the capital cost to build the building, and then there's the service delivery side. This program will largely be funded with Medicaid dollars, and so we've been engaging with our local coordinated care organizations, HealthShare and Care Oregon, to think about how can we make sure that the services are adequately funded and are sustainable. Next slide, please. So we are at this point compiling all this information as well as the actual detail behind it. So like I said, today I talked about the process. The feasibility study will actually include the number of beds, really get into what are the building blocks, what are the foundational principles, what is our early review of the costs and the results of the land search that our broker is starting to look at to see what's out there so we can get a sense of what the project will cost. And so that's the work that is happening right now, is really compiling all of the work that's been happening to date. And we'll get it into a document, present that to you prior to the April meeting. And then hopefully in the April meeting, I can use a lot of that time to answer questions and do kind of an overview of the actual services. So that's it for me. And so now I'd love to open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Kristen. Great presentation. Comments, questions?
Yeah, Pam, can I go ahead? Yeah, that was a great presentation, Kristen, and this is to me right in the middle of the bullseye of services that we certainly are in desperate need of expanding our capabilities in Washington County. I didn't notice what slide it was on, but when you're talking about service organization, you're talking about the co-located and integrated. I can't see the slide number, but anyway, I was just wondering if you have reached out to, like Pacific University has a great nursing program. They have a good dental facility there where they have, training and things like that. Have you been talking to Pacific or other educational institutions that maybe we could integrate some of their students and some of their planning on this as well?
That's a great question. Honestly, no, we haven't. I just wrote it down because we will. So one of the things we have done is we've had the executive director, Virginia Garcia, on our steering committee. And so he's been really helpful about thinking about how do we integrate medical care as we go forward. We're really at this point developing what I call the skeleton of the program, and then we're going to do the refinement of who can be involved, how the services should be operationalized, all that sort of stuff in the next phase. What we wanted to do is get kind of the foundation built right now, and then we're going to build upon that. And so outreaching to organizations like Pacific University is exactly what we would do in the next phase. The other thing that has come up repeatedly is workforce concerns about is there going to be enough workforce to operate a center like this? And so we've had conversations about partnering with PCC They have several courses around becoming peer mentors and certified alcohol and drug counselors. And so really thinking about, can we start evaluating where our workforce gaps are, especially when it comes to culturally responsive services, and partner with the state is focusing on this with Measure 110, as well as some of our local coordinated care organizations. Can we partner with them to really do some targeted workforce development before the center opens?
Yeah, that's great. And you referred to this as skeletal, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like you had really done a very good in-depth evaluation. You've put together a great, not only team, but your supportive team behind that. And so it just felt like you had really gone fairly deep into this process, and this is really good. I like this. The question is, obviously it's going to take money to do this. Is the Here Together initiative, the supportive housing money that's going to come into play, are we going to be able to use any of that to for this enhancement of our services here?
I probably can't speak directly to the Here Together money, but what I can say is with the supportive housing, Metro Bond, and all of that, I'm part of that project as well. And so I've actually had conversations with housing about, we know that permanent supportive housing can make the difference in terms of a person being able to continue their journey of recovery. And so do we have opportunities to pair a supportive housing project with this center and make sure that there's pathways for support there across the two. And so we're really excited about those opportunities and are looking at that. And even as we're starting to do some of the initial land search, we've instructed our brokers to look at land that not only would be the right size for the center, but also land that might be the right size for the center, plus a supported housing development on the same campus. So that is an area we're looking at and really wanting to make sure that they're very, very aligned as we go forward.
That's great. That's great. Good, broad visionary perspective. So yeah, I congratulate you on that. This looks good.
Thank you.
Other questions, comment? Commissioner Fye.
Yeah, just to build on what Jerry just said, and this goes to your comment of centering race or centering equity. I'm not sure how it was phrased. I'm wondering also if you were able to reach out to other culturally specific organizations like NARA or the Asian Health Services Center, or the Abel Gorley Center for OHSU, just culturally specific. And then to compound that, I'm wondering about, I'll just add so you can have just one opportunity to answer all these questions at once, and others have the opportunity to ask. And then along the line of centering race, like what were some of the barriers or challenges that you've learned centering race or equity? And then how did that change your process? More specifically forming the various teams, the leadership teams that you put together.
Okay. I'm going to try and hit all of those. So if I don't, please remind me. So in terms of culturally specific organizations, yes, we have been reaching out. I've been in contact with Jackie Mercer over at NARA, and we're trying to schedule a time to just connect. And I've known Jackie for a very long time, and so really excited to hear her perspectives on it. We reached out to the Alliance for Culturally Specific Providers in behavioral health. And so Asian Health and Service Center, Lutheran, Abel Gordley, there's quite a few different organizations that are part of that association. And so we have a representative of their kind of leader of the association on our steering committee. And so we're very excited to have that. In addition, we reached out to Best Care, which has a residential program that serves Spanish-speaking residents of Oregon, basically. And it's the only program that we know of that is a language-specific program. And so we're reaching out and have an interview scheduled with them to talk about what the challenges are, what the kind of how they've organized their services in a culturally responsive sort of way, so that we can hopefully learn from them. And so that's in process as well. What we have learned, we did do through our focus groups, we have learned a fair amount around what we need to consider moving forward to ensure that the program is culturally responsive. And the number one thing that we heard is that people need to look like us. You know, when we walk in the door, we need to see people who look like us and can talk like us. And so it is challenging in a community that's as diverse as Washington County. How do you do that when we have so many different cultural groups in Washington County? So that's one of the areas that we're really bringing back to the program development work group to start talking about. And that's one of the areas that we'll also be, as we're connecting with other programs, asking them about that. When we did do our learning from others, we did ask specifically how they provide culturally responsive services. Some were better and had better answers than others. San Antonio actually had some really great feedback that we've incorporated. And so, like I said, I think what we learned was that we really needed to have the voice at the table. So we invited a number of people from those focus groups to join our program development work group, so that they're now at the table in every conversation that we're having with the work, to make sure that, you know, we're really centering on multiple perspectives and not just the perspective of the county staff. Did that hit everything?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Are there other questions, comments? Here?
Yeah, I have a whole bunch. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kristen. As you know from the presentations we had in 2019, this is something that I'm quite invested in, certainly during the entirety of my campaign, in centering community need, ensuring that we had further support for mental health and substance abuse was part of that. So I'm looking ahead. I appreciated some of the context here. I think moving ahead in all of our subsequent presentations, we're going to make sure that upfront there's a bit more time on community context, because the need for such services applies for all ages, all backgrounds, all incomes. And we have to make sure that we are painting that picture using simple language that our residents of our community identify with, as opposed to the field specific language such as socioeconomic status, you know. So sorry that all of you who are very well schooled in this area, that I'm asking you to bring this down into a simpler context. I really appreciate how you've laid out the extent of the scoping for this. I will want to hear more, and I assume that it will be in that April document, what has been learned from the outside agencies, such as the questions and categories of information, as well as from the focus groups, and how those needs are being applied for this program moving forward. I am quite concerned about are looking at this much needed investment somewhat in isolation to the entire county portfolio. So we have to be really careful how we proceed. That's not a forewarning at all. It just means that as I move forward in these major milestones, I also have that in mind. Well, if I had to prioritize, this would be top of list. What I want to articulate is, and I'm trying to flip through the slide for this, the one where you had core plus and so forth. I think we need to be quite bold in how we proceed with this program. And make sure that we are thinking big. So for example, when we go about the process of siting, and I know you've talked about multiple locations, but assuming that there will be a new CAT, for example, using your abbreviation, I think we need to make sure that we are investing in a campus design that that embodies all of those components that you talked about. Oh, I see. My problem is I didn't print that slide, so I'm having trouble referencing it. But it's, you know, the one that I mean. Okay, great. I think we need. It's as though I want there to be a master plan, right? And then the master plan has the feasibility phases of different, what it will take for different needs and so forth. So, because what I'm afraid is that we won't ever, that the board over the next 10 to 20 years will be relying upon you to figure out how best to use that first investment, and will never reach that aspired full one. So that's why I would prefer more of that master plan scoping. I'm particularly interested in learning from those other places, what worked, what didn't work. You asked some good questions for them. I'm also interested in, how was LRS chosen?
That was facilities, and I believe that they were already a contractor of Washington County. So I can get you more information on that.
Okay, well, I'm not sure we put forward that that master planning contract in place with equity in mind. So I'm just flagging that for our new CAO. What was the charge of the steering committee?
So the steering committee is really designed to, like I said, hold us accountable for making sure that this project is integrated into the community as a whole, into other areas, other focuses, thinking about how the services can help people avoid the criminal justice system, be used as diversion from the criminal justice system, making sure that we're thinking about the project in terms of the healthcare system, housing, all those sorts of things. So it was really about trying to make sure that from a policy level, we're considering how this center operates to be much bigger than a standalone project.
Yeah, okay. So moving forward, there's going to be quite a political lift with all of this from the standpoint of our community and all of Washington County. So I think moving ahead, we're going to need a board liaison on this project to help ensure that we're able to be successful as a full board. And I think that pertains to every major capital project program that we have going forward from here. I'm not uncomfortable at all with how you're proceeding. I think you're doing a really great comprehensive job and appreciate all of that. Oh, I found the figure. I did have it. I did appreciate what I was hearing about the co-locating of different facilities along the way in that chart. So I like how you've stopped by today and given us this comprehensive picture of how you've been proceeding and how you plan to continue to proceed. You've pointed a lot to this document that's coming in April and this 40-minute time slot you have scheduled in April. I think you're going to, in order for that to be successful, you're going to need to, at least for me, that document is going to need to be available to me as a board member. I'm going to need to have a week to read that in advance of a briefing, which is in advance of that work session. Okay, this is where having a board liaison involved with this, because we need to make sure that with each touch point, we're successful with the questions such that it's almost like a narrowing and a gate system so that the gates close behind and we're able to keep going, right, with successful gates and off ramps. But I know to my core that there's tremendous community need for that. We're going to need to ensure that from this point moving forward, we do a better job of painting that picture for a community, both of what the need is, as well as programmatically how we're hoping to proceed with them along the journey. Because I think this is a center that will address the members of Washington County today and for future generations. We will be very proud, not just those of us on the board now, looking back, but in future board members looking back. So I think that's all of the comments and questions that I had. Thank you very much, Kristen, to you and to the Fuller team. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rogers? Any comments?
No, I don't think so. It's a good body of work, obviously. I remember a couple of 3 years ago at the State of the County meeting, Andy had asked me to speak on mental health issues, and I stress it's probably one of, not the most important thing we have to do right now. So I agree. I'm absorbing what you're saying. I tend to always be concerned about the finances. I mean, there's a lot of requests for money, and there's more to come from other entities. So it's going to be very interesting on the financing. I agree there should be probably a liaison from the board as you proceed to be an advocate, but it's just a good job. Everything costs a lot of money and everything is difficult. So
thank you.
Enough said.
Thank you.
Commissioner Willie? Chair Harrington, did you have another comment?
I think in terms of hearing Commissioner Rogers, what it brought to mind for me is making sure we're not leaving anyone behind in our community, right? Human capital, let's not waste it. So that was just a momentary thought that came to mind. How about you, Commissioner Treese? What are your thoughts? You're the last here in the line.
Thank you. I was just going to underscore the need, the importance for this type of work, and to extend my appreciation to Kristen, the work that you're doing, the fact that you're looking at this from a comprehensive standpoint. You've pulled in a lot of people. You're willing to think about who else needs to be in that group to make sure that we're addressing this issue from that comprehensive standpoint. And to the chair's point, not leaving anybody behind. That's so important. And as I think about it, I would also support the need for a board liaison. And the value there, in my mind, is to help guide the process and to help run trap lines along the way to ensure success. You know, and I believe that that's what the chair is indicating as well. This is making sure that we're really working together to get this across the ultimate finish line. So thank you.
I have an additional question, Vice Chair Treese. As I was listening to what you said, I flipped back to the topic worksheet and the various questions that were asked there. Because if you're intending to walk away from this meeting with answers, then I think we need to go through those questions. I don't want you to assume that, I'm talking to the, in terms of the team, I don't want you to assume that you got a full thumbs up answer to yes to all those questions unless we've gone over them.
Thank you. That's good. Very good point. And we're looking to see what page that is. Just a minute. I went right by it. Do you have the page number there?
Chair Harrington and Vice Chair Treese. I believe that the intent today was just to give you an update of where we are on the planning. And those questions were questions that the steering committee and the program development committee and leadership committee are thinking through, collecting information, and using to develop the plans as we move forward that you'll see in that feasibility study. So I'll let Kristen correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we were looking to have you answer those questions today, because you'll get a lot of that in the feasibility study. So for example, you'll get information about what did we learn when we did the community focus groups, and how are we incorporating that into the planning.
Yeah, correct. Thank you, Marnie. Appreciate that.
So I take it that what you're suggesting is that the policy questions for the board to consider as listed on the topic sheet are going to be more pertinent when we come back in that April work session.
Yes. I mean, just to be really transparent, we believe that in December, you gave us the direction to move forward with this planning and feasibility study. And so that's the stage we're in, is moving forward with the planning and feasibility study. And then we'll come back to you in April and say, here's what we learned and here's the next step.
So we have changes that are still being, that are underway still within this county. So instead of the old model where staff would do all of a full plan and all the detail and then come to the board and say, so yes or no, right? That at least as one member of the board, I'm insisting that we be on the journey. So I can see how these questions will be more pertinent moving forward, but I'm sensitive to how I'm hearing things being described in terms of going beyond that. So I think we'll need a better program timeline, Ms. Angie, in that April presentation.
Thank you, Chair, for that comment. I I would suggest, if it's not today at a future meeting, the board discuss who the board liaison to this project is, because I think that would be very helpful in helping guide these conversations moving forward.
I volunteer.
You're volunteering for that. Is there anybody else that would like to volunteer as well? I'm comfortable if the chair takes that role. Commissioner Rogers, Commissioner Fye, Commissioner Willie, your thoughts? I got a thumbs up from Nafisa, from Commissioner Fye. Thumbs up from Commissioner Rogers.
Yes, thumbs up for me. I just want to clarify something, Vice Chair Treese, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
So the questions, are they still, I was under the impression that these questions have been answered in 2019, but are we answering today? Okay, so those are from in April, we'll come back to those questions.
Yes. Yes. And for the group here, we did get a thumbs up for Chair Harrington to act in the role of liaison to this group from everybody.
Could I just comment, one last comment? Ms. Angie, the policy questions for the board to consider in the topic sheet is intended for this particular meeting. It's okay to foreshadow future questions, but if you could make sure that all of the departments have a common interpretation or a common understanding of each of these categories, that would be most helpful. And remember, they can always attach an additional memo that paints that picture of where we're at, where, what's the overall program, where are we at now, what are we looking forward to?
Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback.
Kristen and Marnie and Nick, I think what you've got is a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm for this. So I commend the work that you've done to date, and we look forward to April to have more information. And while the chair is the liaison to that group, I know I raise my hand and say, if there's any help that I can be, I'm more than willing to participate in and help out. And I sense that everybody is in that same position. So I think that the issue here is just let's all get to work. This is a big need and a lot of support here for the concept. Commissioner Fye?
One last question. So the leadership team, going back, project leadership team, when is the first meeting? Is it happening after April then? I assume, because the question is, I thought we were approving, but then I understood that it was been approved. But so when do we approve that board? Or do we just go with what the chair suggested of adding a board liaison, and then they're approved and they can go to work?
So the leadership team, the program development work group, and the steering committee have all been underway, right? What we're making sure now is that we have more board presence on the project to make sure that as we move forward, we are better integrated in terms in the way that the program is proceeding. Because ultimately, we're the ones who are going to have to make sure that this program and project is ultimately successful.
Does that address your question, Commissioner Fye?
Yes, the question said, should the project leadership continue working with our community to do final program planning and staffing planning? So I was just, but yes.
You're right. The team, we had a little bit of a curveball with regard to these questions today. We'll come back to them in April.
Great. Well, again, thank you very much. It is 10 to noon at this time. We're scheduled for a lunch break from 12 to 1. We've got an extra 10 minutes. Commissioner Willie?
Well, yeah, I don't know if the presenters are available for the 1 and the 1:30 slot, but it says that we've got 40 minutes allocated. I'd like to think we could probably do it quicker than that. If they're available, I'd like to just push ahead so we're not taking a lunch break and then coming back. That would allow the afternoon to be free to get caught up on some of the other items that are on my agenda.
Are there other responses to that? Roy agrees, but I'm not certain that they are even available. There may be others.
I have one complication. So I'm an hour ahead of you, and I kind of need to eat lunch. In looking at the agenda, the CAO let me know that staff was a little concerned about this topic and the two prior, and that if I wasn't able to participate remotely today, that one, I wouldn't have the benefit of hearing and participating in discussion with all of you, but also it meant that the team was going to have to invest additional briefing time, which isn't the highest and best use of their time. So I do plan on being here for the other topics, but I do need a little bit of a lunch break to at least go make my sandwich and eat it off camera while the meeting is proceeding.
So, Tanya, may I ask you what scheduling issues?
So typically I try to be one agenda item ahead, but I had just anticipated the board would want to take lunch, so I haven't connected with Jack or Martin, so I'm not sure if they're available. And then Diane, we haven't connected on your item. So I appreciate the suggestion, but because of that, I would suggest we take a quick lunch.
Commissioner Willie, thank you for your suggestion. We're going to take a lunch break. Thank you, but we're going to reconvene at 1 o'clock.
Thanks for the vote anyway, Pam. That's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Take care, everybody. See you back. And Clerk Moss,
Yes.
Are we returning on a different channel?
Yes, we are returning on the different 1 o'clock Zoom link.
Great. Thank you very much. And we'll see you back at 1 o'clock.